Why I voted for Donald Trump for the very first time in 2024, and why I voted straight red for the first time in my 50-year life in the 2024 election. Take zero. All right, so today is Sunday, 5 days after the 2024 election, where Donald Trump won in a landslide, which I suspected he probably would. Progressives on the left have been losing their minds for the last 5 days. They're eating each other. They're pointing fingers, yelling and screaming, being completely delusional. The rank and file progressives are generally struggling with how Donald Trump got elected. I'm going to talk about all that stuff today. Again, remember, this is for my son, so this is for posterity in the future. Why is it I made the decision I did to vote the way I did this year? That's what this whole video is about. So a little bit of background. So I'm 50 years old. The first presidential election I ever voted in was the 92 election. I turned 18 6 months before the 1992 election, which was between George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot. I voted for Ross Perot in the 92 election. I registered Republican because my dad said, hey, you should pick a party. I was going to register independent. He said, you should pick a party, you should register Republican, and then you should vote your conscience. And when I asked him why, he said, the number of people who are registered in those parties matter. There are fewer registered Republicans than there are registered Democrats, so go ahead and add them and give them another person in the registration rolls, especially in New York State, which is where I was when I turned 18. And then vote your conscience your whole life. So that's what I've done. My whole life I have voted for Republicans and Democrats. I wouldn't say it's been 50-50. I would say if you were to measure it over the course of my life, I've probably gone 60-40 Republicans. So that is all races, local races, state level, federal. I probably skew 60-40 to Republicans. I've never had an election where I voted straight ticket until this year. This is the very first time. And in fact, I'll tell you exactly how I voted this year here in a second. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm doing it because A, I want to store it for posterity, but B, hopefully maybe people can learn from it a little bit, get insight into why someone like me would vote the way I did. So I voted for Ross Perot in 92. Primarily because he was a businessman. And I really felt like, to me, it just made sense that a businessman should run our country, run a capitalist country, and not someone who had been a politician their whole life. I didn't vote for Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton never had a job. In fact, his whole life, since he had been a Rhodes Scholar and everything, he wanted to be president. And he didn't have, so that meant he was a career politician. And politicians are liars. So if your stated goal is to be a politician, I want to be in politics my whole life and I want to run for office, then you are mastering the art of lying to people. That's the primary skill that you have to master. There's a bunch of other skills too. And I'm not saying that politicians are bad people. I'm not saying that the type of lying that they do isn't probably necessary. But it's a fact that politicians are professional liars. That's why most of them are lawyers, because lawyers are professional liars, which is kind of funny when you think about how lawyers are supposed to deal in fact. But in fact, lawyers are constantly, they have a love-hate relationship with the truth. So for me, it just made sense that Ross Perot is who I'd vote for in 92. A businessman would be who I voted for. In 96, I supported Bill Clinton. I thought he did a good job between 92 and 96. The only thing I really thought was weird was I really didn't like that Hillary Clinton had pushed for universal health care, single-payer health care. To me, for my whole life, I haven't thought government was very good at anything. I think government's necessary, but I've never personally observed that government was particularly good at anything. And therefore, if it wasn't really good at it, why would I want it to be in charge of the most important things in my life, like my health care? That doesn't mean government's not important, but to me, it just didn't make sense. If I had this option out there for me, where if I got a good job and I sought out, I got an education and I worked hard, I sought out employers who had good healthcare plans, why wouldn't I want the better healthcare plan than to take a step back and deal with what they deal with in Canada and England? And all the people who are talking about universal health care, by the way, health care is a very important thing to me. I think every person should be insured in the United States, and I think we need to do a better job with it. It's one of my key issues. But I don't believe it should be single payer run by the government. In fact, my whole life I've thought, wow, once you give government a power, once you give them some type of authority, you don't ever get that back. Like the only way you get it outside of the United States is through like violent revolution. And so I think we should be very careful about the powers we give government. I think we should be incredibly cautious. And I think that's also why that's why politicians use fear. They'll say never waste a good crisis. This is Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff for Barack Obama. He was famous for saying you should never waste a good crisis. So you want to connect some policy that you want to implement with the emotion of the electorate. So if there's some major crisis, you want to try and connect the two together to get that passed, which to me also just seems really disingenuous. And politicians will say, well, that's just how it works. Well, maybe that isn't how it should work, right? And I think maybe we should explore that a little deeper, right? So I voted for Clinton in 96 because I thought he did a decent job between 92 and 96. I didn't vote for him in 92. I voted for him in 96, and I didn't think Bob Dole was a very good Republican candidate in 96. I supported Al Gore all the way up until 2 weeks before the election in 2000. And then he gave a speech about gun control and about how he supports the Second Amendment, but he believes that he would support a provision where private gun owners had to store their guns in local armories in their communities. Okay, so not in their homes. And he lost me there. The Second Amendment is absolute. It's the First Amendment is the most important of all the amendments, the freedom of speech and religion and expression and assembly. And the Second Amendment is how we enforce the first. The Second Amendment isn't there so that we can have militias. The Second Amendment is there so we keep our own government in check. Okay. If you believe otherwise, then you have shown me that you haven't read the Declaration of Independence, you haven't read the U.S. Constitution, and you haven't read the Federalist Papers. Our founders told us why the Second Amendment is there. Okay, just go read the Federalist Papers, and you'll know why the Second Amendment is there. If you're a person who says the Second Amendment never intended to enshrine the individual right to bear firearms in order to fight off despotism and tyranny, then you have not read the Federalist Papers. Okay. All right. So I voted for George Bush in 2000. I changed my vote in the last 2 weeks, and I supported George Bush. 2004, I supported George Bush. John Kerry was a terrible candidate. 2008, I supported Barack Obama, the first president I ever donated to. I've supported him again in 2012 and again donated to his campaign. And then both in 2016 and 2020, I supported the Libertarian candidate because I couldn't support Donald Trump. Here in 2024, I voted for Donald Trump. I voted for him loudly. I said I was wrong in 2016 that if you supported Donald Trump, you were ignorant or racist or both. I was wrong. I believed what it is the media told me. Primarily what I've learned over the last 8 years, and I think I already knew this on some level, but the mainstream media, the corporate media, when Donald Trump says that they are the enemy of the people, I agree with him. I agree that when Donald Trump says that the corporate media in today's form is the enemy of the people, he's right. I believe that they think Americans are stupid. I believe that they don't believe Americans can be trusted with their own lives. And I believe they do it. They protect themselves by saying they're coming from a place of empathy, but they're not. They're coming from a place of elitism. And they use that elitism as justification to lie to the American people. Okay, so over the last 8 years, I really stopped listening to corporate media altogether. It's not that I don't watch them. I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post, but it became very obvious to me during Donald Trump's his first administration, 16 to 20, where things really started to change for me was Charlottesville. When I watched Donald Trump's speech after Charlottesville, okay, I watched it live, and then I watched the coverage of his speech separately. And what the corporate media was saying, what the mainstream media was saying, was not what I saw him say. They were saying something totally different. And that's where the real fine people on both sides part came through, which has been debunked a million. Like, that was created by corporate media. They created that narrative. It wasn't true. It was just a straight lie. And it's a lie that they continued to tell all the way up until this election. I mean, Barack Obama, who I still love to this day, but I'm disappointed in, he parroted that message before a week before this election. And I don't like being lied to. Donald Trump loves America. It became abundantly clear between 2016 and 2020 that Donald Trump was frustrated with government, and he loves the United States, and he prioritizes the United States. And it became abundantly clear as I looked back on the Obama administration and I looked at the Biden administration that the left in the United States hates America. They believe there's something inherently evil about us. And therefore, we cannot be trusted with leading the world. And we have to give that to higher powers. We have to give that to the United Nations. We have to give that to this future globalist government that they hope to see one day. The World Economic Forum is the first iteration of that globalist government. It became abundantly clear that the leadership of the Democratic Party didn't like America as much as Donald Trump did. When they called Donald Trump a racist, and then I really started looking at what Donald Trump had ever said about race, when I looked at what they used to say about Donald Trump when he was a Democrat, when I started looking at the actual facts, Russia collusion, when I started hearing Adam Schiff from California over and over and over again, Donald Trump colluded with Russia. That was a lie. It was just a flat out lie. He knew it was a lie. The Democrats knew it was a lie. The corporate media knew it. They all knew it was a lie, and they just continued to lie. And I don't know how they didn't think that would come back to bite them. And then to see the Democrats' message that if you're white, if you're male, if you're straight, you are evil. You're the problem. And I'm like, wait a minute. I grew up being taught that we're supposed to treat everyone with respect and as equals, that people should earn the good and the bad way you treat them. It should be based on the content of their character and their actions. But no, the Democrats shifted to lunacy. White Fragility and Robert DiAngelo, the book is garbage. The 1619 Project is garbage. It's not. Slavery and racism didn't start in 1619. I mean, I studied history in college. I'm a sociologist. I know those things not to be true. And it became abundantly clear that I couldn't trust anything that Democrats were saying to me. They would say, a man can be a woman. No, they can't. A man can be a man who thinks he's a woman, but a man can't actually be a woman because a woman is an adult human female. And a female has certain characteristics we can measure. When it came to the transgender issue, everything became a phobia. You're transphobic. You're xenophobic. Wait, because I want a border. Borders are where you separate good ideas and bad ideas. That's why we need borders. Okay, this is where we say border is where this idea ends and the next idea begins. That's a border. Okay, because I want strong borders. I want to know who's in the country. I want the people who value what it is we value here in the United States. That suddenly means that I'm xenophobic. And I'm like, how? I'm not afraid of people who are not in the United States. I'm afraid of no one. I mean, it's one thing to go, hey, it is rational that you want to know who's in your country. And then all of a sudden, progressives are telling you, no, it's not rational. You're evil. You're a horrible person. And the only way you're not a horrible person is if you believe what I believe. And then if you looked at the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020, and you looked at what I've been on X for a long time, pre and post Elon Musk. And, I left Facebook during the 2020 election because of what Facebook was doing to manipulate the election in 2020. And I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2020. But it was blatantly obvious what was happening. The media was censoring ideas. They were censoring voices. And they were doing it in the name of misinformation and disinformation. No. That's not how this works. There isn't some higher power who says, here are the things you can and can't hear. Do you know how dangerous that is? There are things that we've learned. There are absolute truisms we've learned over the course of humanity. Okay? Human beings are inherently selfish. That is, we are looking out for our own well-being first. We climb 2 mountains. David Brooks from the New York Times, who used to be a socialist Democrat back in the late 70s and the early 80s, there's a great... You could see why it is he became a conservative. It was because he was a rational guy who couldn't defend leftist positions. He was a very rational thinker who couldn't defend leftist positions, so he became a conservative. But he's really very much a middle of the road. He's in the vein of Andrew Sullivan as a conservative, just right of center. David Brooks wrote a book called Second Mountain. I encourage everyone to read it. Says that we climb 2 mountains in our lives, and he's right. The first mountain is us taking care of us. We're selfish. Once we take care of ourselves enough where we feel safe, that's when we start taking care of others. So number 1, human beings are inherently selfish. And number 2, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you know those two things, you know why it is that you should question everything government does. And you should question every person in government. In the 2020 election, the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, that was an orchestrated effort where you had 50 former national security officials write a letter saying this looked like Russian disinformation. They knew it wasn't. The FBI knew in 2020 that the laptop was authentic. But they didn't want Trump in office. And the reason they didn't want Trump in office is because Trump wants to dismantle the administrative state. The United States is run. We all know this. You go to the DMV, you go to the IRS, you deal with some unelected official who has absolute power over you. The person you're dealing with is an unelected official who has absolute power over you. They can seize your bank accounts. This is why the Chevron case that took place, Chevron 2020, I think it was earlier this year, where basically the agencies cannot write law. Okay? That they can't write law. That was why that's such an important decision. Law has to be written by elected officials. The Chevron case, if you don't know the Chevron case, if a lot of the stuff that I'm saying to you right now is unfamiliar, you should write this down. Go back, watch this again, write it down, and go look these things up. Okay? Roe versus Wade being overturned wasn't about controlling women's bodies. It was about getting the Supreme Court's authority correct. Roe versus Wade was a flawed decision. Even RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, said that the legal theory behind Roe versus Wade was wrong and it won't stand the test of time. It was the Supreme Court correcting the legal theory, the precedent. The Supreme Court didn't have the authority to enshrine in law that abortion is a protected right with the way that by doing it through the privacy clause. They didn't have the authority. All that overturning Roe versus Wade was saying the Supreme Court can't make this decision. They can't, not in the way that they did it. And therefore, it needs to go back to the states. By the way, it should be in the hands of the states. In Florida, 70% of Floridians in this election said, you know what? We don't want abortion to be after 6 weeks. Guess what? You have nations in Europe where it's 6 weeks. You have nations in Europe where it's 12. The longest is 16. The left here in the United States believes that a woman's human right is to kill her child whenever she wants, up to birth. And some people even argue up to 6 weeks. There was a judicial nominee who had written a paper making an argument that up to 6 weeks after birth, it could be a woman's right. So that means that a baby is only a life if a woman wants it? I mean, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Like, that's not even rational. And by the way, before anyone attacks me, I believe abortion's murder. I am a Christian. I believe it's murder. But I also believe from a policy perspective, the right thing to do is to allow abortion to be legal up to 12 weeks. I believe our government is about compromise. And if 70, 80% of Americans believe abortion should be a protected right, then our system was designed to be able to make anything law if 75% of Americans, for the most part, agree with it. That's how our system is designed. That's why we're the supermajority in the Senate, the filibuster, the way that we pass constitutional amendments with 2/3 votes. It's designed basically if greater 70 to 75% of the population agrees with something, we can enshrine basically anything in law for the most part. Okay? You can undo a constitutional amendment. You can create a new constitutional amendment with that kind of support. All right? But here's at the end of the day, here's why I voted for Donald Trump. And here's why I'm a conservative. All right? I'm going to tell you why I voted for Donald Trump. And by the way, I didn't vote for a single Democrat. We had elections here in Dallas County where there were only Democratic justices running, unopposed. I didn't vote for them. I left it blank. This year I voted straight red. And I've never done that before. And Democrats will say, it's because I'm a middle-aged white masculine male. I hate women. I hate whatever. No, it's not. First off, I'm half Cherokee. Okay, I love being able to pull the Native American card. I win the fucking oppression Olympics. My people were marched to fucking Oklahoma to their death. My mom got murdered when I was 7. I grew up in a trailer park. I grew up with nobody. I wasn't related to anyone but my half-brother growing up. I grew up dirt-ass fucking poor. My mom got murdered. I found her dead body. I'm the descendants of Native Americans. Eat a fucking dick. I voted straight red because the left has lost its mind. Completely lost its mind. And if they have their way, the world that they create will be terrible for my children. I'm a wealthy guy, so I can afford to pay more when it comes to inflation. Inflation wasn't the reason for me that I voted straight red. I voted straight red on principles and on the values this nation was founded, and because I want people who grew up like me to have the same opportunity I did. But right now, Democrats, the left controls our schools, and they encourage kids to lean into their victim status. So then and if they lean into their victim status, then it means they need a savior. You know who your savior is? It's you. It's in here. There's nothing you can't overcome. Not a fucking thing. With the right perspective, there's nothing you can't overcome. You don't need a savior. You are your own savior. I promise you. America is not inherently racist. America is not systemically racist. If it were, you would have to explain Frederick Douglass and Barack Obama and George Washington Carver and Michael Jordan. You'd have to explain Thomas Sowell. You would have to explain all of these people of color who have succeeded in our society en masse. You would have to explain how African American wealth was moving up at a 45-degree angle before 1965, when we passed the Great Society and we incentivized families to break apart. And it disproportionately impacted families of color. It had the same impact on poor white families in West Virginia and Appalachia as it had on poor black families in the inner city. But if you want to trace the decline, the decline of the African American family, it starts in 1965. And you should look at what happened in 1965. And you should read Thomas Sowell. We're just being lied to over and over and over and over again. And you know what? You want to know why I voted for Donald Trump? Because by and large, he told us the truth about us. Does he lie? Of course. He's a hyperbolic, bombastic New York State real estate developer. He fakes it until he makes it. I know 1,000 fucking people like him. But look at his kids. Look at his children. Look at his family. Who doesn't want his family? Who doesn't want his kids? Look at how his kids love him. Look at how his kids love each other. Look at how their kids, look at how their children love them. Look at his success. It requires cognitive dissonance to believe all the evil things about Donald Trump. And I will say this. I believed him in 2016. I did a Facebook post. I cannot believe, you're ignorant or both. You're ignorant, racist, or both if you voted for Donald Trump. And I had a buddy of mine, Jeremy Butler, sent me a message, or God rest his soul, he passed away. He sent me a message, a DM on Facebook, and he explained to me why he was supporting Donald Trump. And he basically made the argument that there's something wrong with American politics. It's been infiltrated by this administrative state. All these unelected people are making decisions about our lives. And Donald Trump isn't owned by anybody. It isn't the machine that's pushing him there. It isn't these shadowy figures in the background who are fitting the bill and then expecting him to lie to the rank and file Americans while he takes care of these shadowy figures. That's what's been happening. Okay, that's what's been happening since Kennedy. Kennedy was our last president who wasn't really beholden to anybody because his father paid for 50% of his presidential campaign. Everybody else got elected on someone else's money. It went Kennedy, and then it was Reagan, and then ever since, Clinton's probably the worst example. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton didn't have dick when they went into the White House. And I love Barack Obama. I do. I think as a charismatic speaker and a thinker and a leader back in 2008 and 2012, I think he really did try to cross the aisle in 2008. I really do. I think he has definitely lost his way now. I think he's part of that machine now. Donald Trump lost money while he was in office. He left office in 2020 with less money than he came in. I want you to go ahead and look up the last president that happened to. And I'm pretty sure it was Truman. Was the last president who came out worth less than when he went in? We're just lied to. Donald Trump won in a landslide because Americans stopped believing the lies. And the real casualty of this election is the corporate media. And that's a good thing. I voted straight red to send a message. And that message is to Chuck Schumer and the leaders of the Democratic Party, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, who I struggle, AOC, Nancy, how they get reelected, Adam Schiff, the types of people they are. That's what tells you what's wrong. California is the future of America if we had elected Kamala Harris. California, there's a reason that in communist states they have to build walls to keep people in, and in capitalist countries you have to build walls to keep people out. California, New York State, these are places that have to, if they could, they would build walls to keep people in. Because we can't let our taxpayers go. We have to keep them here and force them to pay the taxes, no matter what we do. In California, the Democrats have absolute power, and they've constructed it that way. 70% of Californians are Democrats. And even though way more Republicans did much better in this last election, they still didn't even come remotely close. And they won't. It'll require complete and total, utter economic collapse. And that impacts people's lives so negatively. You don't want to see that. You want to mitigate it beforehand. But I voted straight red because had we not voted, if Donald Trump had not won this election, I can't say, here's what would have happened. The Democrats would have struck down the filibuster in the Senate, which would have required a simple majority to get anything done. And the reason they would have done it was because by striking it down, they could have done these next two things. They could have immediately made Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. states, which would have given them 4 more senators. Okay? So they would have struck down the filibuster to give them 4 more senators, and then they would, with the additional senators, they would have packed the Supreme Court. And then they would have done exactly what they've done in California. And by the way, no one wants to be in California. Okay? The single greatest migration, the total number of people who have left any state over the last decade, in the greatest numbers, is California. And think about that. Think about all the people who go to California to get into Hollywood. So you got that mass migration into L.A. The number of people who left everywhere else in the state offset all the people who try to go to L.A. to be in Hollywood, because there's only one Hollywood. It's what happened during COVID played a huge role. What happened to our kids? The fact of the matter is that the left has weaponized empathy, the leadership. I'm not saying rank and file progressives don't have good intentions. The average person down the street doesn't have good intentions when they say they're a Democrat. I believe they're generally empathetic people who really believe in some type of utopia, and they really want it. And they mean it in their heart. And they don't understand why the world is harsh and dark. And they can't accept that there just aren't enough resources to go around. If we take the total GDP across the entire world and we divide it by 8 billion people, there's $16,000 in gross domestic product to go around for every person on Earth. This is why in communism, all you end up with is mass starvation. What you have to have is an economic system and a political system that incentivizes people to maximize their output. And they got to maximize their output by, if I maximize my output, I directly benefit first before I can help others. The Second Mountain from David Brooks. There's one last problem that I think we need to fix. And this is to the progressives out there. No progressives watching this. Because they don't. A progressive will never make it this far in the video. And that's the problem. Progressives, cancel culture hurt progressives. The reason you're so lost is cancel culture. You created an environment where you shut out anyone who didn't think like you. You created an echo chamber. You convinced yourself that anyone who doesn't think like you is evil. They're an ism. They're an ist. They're an ableist. They're a sexist. They're a racist. And the reason you do that is because it's intellectually cheap. It doesn't require a lot of brain power to do that. And it makes you feel good, which is probably how you make most of your decisions, based on how you feel, which I would argue is a terrible way to make your decisions. Just because you feel one way doesn't make it real. We have irrational feelings all the time, like when we go into a haunted house. You're terrified in a haunted house. If you are, that's irrational. There is no actual risk. There is no chance you're going to die. There's no chance that that guy holding a fake knife is going to kill you, yet you are scared. It is irrational. And if you take one step back and you go, you know what, there's nothing here for me to be afraid of. In the haunted house, there's nothing to be afraid of. That's not real. The emotion goes away. The fear goes away. That emotion has been weaponized against you. The way that you stop people having the ability to use your emotions against you is by don't shut out the people who don't think like you. The reason you are lost is because you live in an echo chamber. You don't hear opposing voices. You know, I said this to my kids. I'm actually a very center, just right of center. My belief is that conservatives should be in control, but they should only have a slight majority. I don't like super majorities. They should have a slight majority. And my son Jared was asking me the other day why. My son Jared really likes the fact that there's a super majority in the Supreme Court, a 6-3. And I said, I don't like that. I'd prefer it to be 5-4. And he's like, why? And I said, because it's the moderate who makes the decision then. When you have a slight majority, it's the moderate who goes back and forth who's making the final decision. And I want the moderate to make the call. I don't want the extremist making the call. I don't want the hawk, the Paul Wolfowitz from the Bush administration making the call. And I don't want Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff from the Obama administration, making the call. I want the moderate. I want the one in the middle. And slight majorities give you that. And I want that to tilt to the right. That's when the United States is the best. We are the best when we have a slight conservative majority. When the Susan Collins of the world and the Lisa Murkowskis of the world are the ones who are making the call. When the John McCains of the world are making the call. The moderate in the middle. They're the ones who are saying, I'm going this way. McCain was right not to strike down the ACA. Obamacare was a step in the right direction. It is horribly imperfect, but it was a step in the right direction. It used the private market. It used the private market to get more people insured. That's what we need to do. There's no excuse in the United States for anyone who wants to have health insurance to not having health insurance. But the government shouldn't be running it. So if you're a progressive and you're lost, you need to invite different voices into your life. You need to stop shutting out people who don't think like you. You need to encourage free speech. You need to stop believing everything is hate. And you need to start working in the world of the rational and the measurable. Okay? Because the truth of the matter is the world doesn't care about your feelings. Nature doesn't care about your feelings. And whether we like it or not, we're just a bunch of animals on Earth living in nature. Or really aren't all that special, other than the fact that God created us. And if you're a conservative, think about how quiet you've been over the last 8 years. I mean, it took me, I didn't speak up until June of this year. Today it's November 10th. I didn't speak up until June of this year, publicly on my Twitter. All my advisors told me it was a mistake. You're going to hurt yourself you're going to hurt yourself in business. And I said, I don't care. I have a responsibility to tell it like it is. And so for the last 5 months or so, and I followed the lead of other people. Elon Musk, Joe Rogan. Look at all the people who defected, the left. Look at the people who went from right to left. Liz Cheney went from right to left and supported Kamala Harris. And look at the people who went from left to right. Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk to support Donald Trump. What fucking team do you want to be on? You want to be on the Liz Cheney team? You really think that Liz Cheney has a rank and file Americans' best interests at heart? No, she doesn't. She's a warmonger. She makes money. The more war the United States is in, the more money she makes. She doesn't give a shit about the kids who go there and fucking die. She don't give a shit. Her father didn't care. So going forward, I won't be quiet about why I love America and what I believe. And when Trump fucks up, I'm going to say it. And he will. Politicians fuck up. But I have absolute faith that the next 4 years in the United States are going to be profound. And this video is about me declaring, I have absolutely no doubt that the next 4 years will be profound. And that we dodged a bullet last Tuesday. And that's why America is the greatest nation that's ever existed, because we never swing too far in one direction. And Americans can be trusted to choose who leads us. All right, with that, like, subscribe, comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.